Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll continue putting in functionality into our Winforms application. Our most recent set of tasks had us do our manage vehicle listings where we could add a new car, and I'll just add one for sample sake. And we know that when we click Save Changes, it would get added to the database, and then we would have to refresh the grid to see our new car. Of course, when we select the row and click Edit Car, we could change this. So if Mini was supposed to have two ends, then I correct it, click Save Changes, and then once again refresh the grid. So we can look into automating that grid refresh in a bit, and I'll be doing that in the rental record management. But just to finish up our recap, the final thing that we would want to do with our vehicles would be to remove them. So if I select a row, and remember we discussed that if there's a rental record already associated with a vehicle, that the database would make it a bit more difficult to actually delete the vehicle itself. But I can always select this vehicle, click Delete Car, and then it would... Oh, okay, and then I refresh, and then I see. So we would want to automate that refresh because just now the car was removed, but the grid didn't show me it was removed, and then I tried again, and then I got an error. All right. So what we want to do is have a grid-like setting in the view archive, and then this will allow us to kind of do those CRUD operations, and then I'll show you other things like automating that grid refresh. So to get this party started, the first thing I want to do is create a new form that will serve as my archive window for my rental records. So I go to my Solution Explorer, I right click in the solution, go to Add, New Item, or I can just go down to Form. I'm going to call this form Manage Rental Records and then click Add. And once our form is added, we do our regular changes where we go to Properties and we change the text in the header to be more, more human readable. We make it a little bigger. And then I'm going to borrow the same elements that I had over on the Manage Vehicle listing. I'm going to borrow each and every one of them. So I'm just going to borrow the label, and I'm holding down Control while I click. So I'm holding down Control while I click the refresh button, the grid, the three buttons. Then I'm going to Control C to copy, go back over to my design, and then Control V to paste. After pasting, I'm just going to change this label text. So I click the label, go to the properties, and I'm just going to change this to Manage Rental Records. All right, just fix my spelling errors, and then we're good to go. So Manage Rental Records, that's our new window. And then, of course, from the main window, I need to set it up on the click events. I'm just going to close all the unnecessary windows right now. Go back to my main window, get the button, and I'll say View Archive. I'll set up a click event, and all I'm going to do is launch this new window. So I'm just going to copy, or I'll just write it out. So var manage rental records is equal to new manage rental records as my class. Then I will do that MDI parent is equal to this, and the window should show. All right. Now, after copying over these things, what we want to do, of course, after renaming our label, we want to change out our buttons. So right now, they still have the same names from the previous form, and that's because, well, the same name can exist on two entirely different forms. So in two entirely different classes, sure, you can have the same names, but contextually, I don't want this to be BTN add car. I would want it to be BTN add maybe record. All right. And just the same way, anything that says car for these buttons should say record. So the text should be add new rental record or record. I'll just say record. And then I'll do the same for the edit. So I'll just change those out. You can do those on your own. All right, so by the end of that exercise, anything that said car should now say record. I also might want to change the name on this grid just to make sure everything is consistent, because this says GV vehicle list. So I wanted to say GV record list. All right. So now that we've, I think the refresh button may also need to be changed. Well, it's BTN refresh, so that can stay. All right. Now we know that we need click events for each of these buttons. So I'm going to just set up those click events from now by just double clicking each button and generating the click events. So I have the click event to add, click event for the record, and click event for the delete. We already have a window that adds, so I can actually just write that code right now. And we would kind of follow the same pattern as we did when we were doing the manage vehicle listings. So if I go back to that click event for add new car, you see that what we did was just launch the window, tell it that the parent of the launching window is its parent also, and then show. So I'm going to follow that same pattern for the BTN add record click. All right, there we go. So when we click the BTN add record, it will launch the same window as we would have launched if we clicked from the menu itself. All right, so we're giving the user two options. Of course, it's your application. You can style it how you would like, but that's how I'm doing it. Now, if you pay attention here, I don't know if I would have gone through this before, but you see those three dots underneath the new. If I hover over it and click on that light bulb that appears, they show me that I can actually simplify the initialization or declaration of this object, right? So if I click on that, then you're going to see a different way to initialize the object, which we would have seen when we were using the LINQ code, right? So it's universal. Once you have a class and you are setting properties of the class after initializing the object, you can actually do it like this. Or you can do it the way you're comfortable doing it and let Visual Studio rearrange it for you. Now, for the rental records, we're going to have to write a lot of similar code to what we're doing when we're doing manage vehicle listing. So I'm actually just going to be copying and pasting a lot of the code because we'd have written a lot of it already. So I'm pasting my connection to the database or my entities object and the object initialization, which went inside of my constructor. Also, I would have set up the load event for the form. So I need a load event on this form. So I'll just go and double click the form itself. And that gives me a load event. And then inside of this load event for the managed vehicle listings, I would have tried. And I'm just going to copy all of this because, I'll be retyping very similar code anyway. So I copied over populate grid, but of course I don't have a method inside of this new form called populate grid. So I can hover over it and click that light bulb, and then it says generate the method for me, which, okay, that's good. Can remove that generated line. And then for the populate grid, I'll be doing a similar query. So let's just write out the query for the populate grid for our manage rental records. So of course, the first thing I want to do is declare some object or some variable. I'll just say var records is equal to, and then I'll call on my database object dot car rental records, which is my table. And then I would say dot select. And I want to be very specific with what I'm selecting. So I'm going to say select, open up my Lambda expression using Q as my object or my token. But I'm loading into a new blank object. All right. And let me just put a semicolon here so I don't forget later on. And then I'm going to say what it is I want to select and what that column name is. All right. So the columns that we intend to have would be like customer. So I'm just going to say customer is equal to Q dot, and I want customer name, comma, and then date in. So here I can actually use my own names per property, right? So date in is going to have the value of Q dot date rented, date out, my bad, is going to have the value of date rented. All right. And then I'm going to say, comma, date in is going to have the value of q dot date returned. Of course, I need the ID. So ID is going to be equal to q dot ID. All right. And then the last one that I would want is the cost. So cost is equal to q dot cost. But then you notice now that, of course, I need to say the type of car or what car was borrowed. So you see, cost is kind of grayed out. Everything else is, strong and white, but this is grayed out. That's because the property name I'm giving it is the same as a property coming from the database. So I can actually just remove that and just say q.cost, give me the cost, and I need the car. Now, if you look back in our database, and I'll just go over to the database quickly, you'll see that we have the type of car ID. I have a table for the types of cars, sure, but then I have, the name and the ID over in that one. So let me just select top 1000, or let me just look at the design rather, so that we can see the column names. So I have ID, make, model, VIN, license plate, number, and year. Now, in showing the details of the rental record, I probably wouldn't want to just show the ID, because car ID 1 means nothing to me, but that is the property that I have access to inside of my rental record. Now, in a typical situation in SQL syntax, I would have to use an inner join statement to actually get the details of the car being referenced. Details meaning the make and the model, right? So if I wanted to say all of this information and then print the car details, car make and model inside of a query, then I would have to use an inner join. LINQ allows me to actually access the property. So let's say I said car as my property, and then I wanted the make and the model of the related car, or the car related to this record. All we really have is the ID, because if I say q dot, then you're going to see type of car ID. Once again, that is not useful. So I can kind of simulate a situation where I would need an inner join and I need details from the related entity or the related record by saying, and now we see the use of this types of car property. So remember that we had the types of car ID, and I was saying that we have inside of the relationship, what LINQ does is give us access to all related objects off the bat. So I can actually say q dot types of car, and then they try to make it singular. Sometimes it's awkward because it's types of cars. That's the name of the table. And in this, it's types of car, because it's saying that I know only one car is associated with this rental record. So it's a car, right? So they try to, modify the singularity and plurality of each property just to indicate whether it's a singular or multiple, right? So if we're looking at the types of car table, types of cars table, then LINQ would show us that we have rental records, because one car could be in multiple rental records. But then since we're looking at the rental record, then we know one rental record is associated with one car or types of car in this situation. All right. I hope that's not too confusing, but the more you use it, the more you realize how exactly it works. So I can say q dot types of car, which is a class representing the entity or the related record, once again, of the car details. So then I can say types of car dot, and then it gives me access to every single property that would have been in the types of cars table anyway. So I did say I wanted the make and the model, so I could say car is equal to q.typesofcar.make, and then concatenate that onto q.typesofcar.model. All right. So when this runs, it will give me all of these properties basically from the database table. They're all right there in the database table. And then it will kind of do an inner join to say, okay, give me the details of the related record from the types of cars table and give me the make, space, model, and store that inside my custom property called car. All right. So the expectation is that when this grid loads, we're going to be seeing all of these details in addition to the details for the related car. And then, well, I was premature with the semicolon. Of course, after all of this, we always do a to list just to make our lives easier. All right. So the next line, which I'm just going to go back over to manage vehicle listing, would have me set up the data source, the header text for any one of them that I think is too cumbersome to display, and then hide the ID. So I'm just going to copy these lines, and then I'm just going to make them relative to this situation. So actually, I don't think, okay, date in and date out. So I definitely want to change those. But before I do that, I need to change out the references. So I need GV, and then it's record list. So it's no longer vehicle list, but now it's record list. So I'm just going to change those out. The data source is not cars, but it's records. All right. And then the header text. So now I can actually say which column header text I want to change out. So I can probably use the named columns here because I'm not so confident about the ordering, right? The ordering might change at any time. I may introduce or remove. So if I just say 4, like I did in manage vehicle list, so it worked here, you know. But then if I modified the arrangement of these columns, then 4 may not be license plate number anymore, right? So instead of referencing it by its subscript or its placement, instead I'm going to reference it by its name. So I'm going to say that the column called date out or date in, it doesn't really matter. I'll just duplicate that and do one for in and one for out. All right. And then the date in one, I want it to say date space in. And then the date out one, I want it to say date space out. All right. And then I want to once again hide the column for the ID. All right, so with all those changes made, let's at least see if our grid loads. So I'm just going to start up this application. Then I went to manage rental records and clicked view archive, and voila. So our grid is loading, and notice that we're seeing the car, record, Subaru, and a Honda Space Civic, right? So just to verify, I can actually have multiple windows open. So I'll just expand the application so you can see both the vehicles listed to the left and the rental records to the right. So we see that Subaru is really just the make. So that's why we're only seeing the word Subaru. Whereas Honda Civic, make and model, are displaying the details accordingly, right? Further to that, if I click add new record, then we see add new record coming up, allowing us to put in a new record. So I'm going to put in one test driver. Cost is $1,500. And the date returned would be, let's say, the 1st of March. The type of car is a Rolls-Royce Phantom. I submit, and then everything goes through. I can modify this window now that it closes afterwards. All right, so that we don't have somebody clicking submit twice. But once we close and we click refresh, well, there's no refresh here. So we need to wire that refresh button up. But then we did say we were going to try for an automatic refresh. But by closing the window and reopening it, it reran that query, that populate grid query. And then we see that our grid is populated. So I'm just going to quickly wire up the edit and the delete record functionality. So I'm going to go back to my code that we wrote for the edit car listing, and I'm going to just take all of this code because literally it's going to be very similar, and I'm going to place it inside of the function, and then I'm just going to change out the relevant references. So it's not GV vehicle list anymore, it's GV record list, and I'm getting the same row with the same cell ID. I'm looking inside of rental records this time, though, not types of car. Car rental records is our table. So DB car rental records first, or default, give me where Q common ID. So you may have some little cosmetic things to change out. And the variable here is not car, but it is now record. All right. And then we're here launching add edit vehicle. So remember that we did add edit vehicle as our window to allow us to edit or add a vehicle. We started off with add car rental record. So we're going to have to make some major modifications to that to get it to work. So I'm just going to comment out these lines for now. All right, and we'll get back to them. We're going to have to do that in part 2. I'm just going to go back, get that delete code, and get the try catch everything, bring it over, make those cosmetic changes once again. So it's GV record list and not GV vehicle list. So I'm getting the same column, different table once again, car rental records, common ID. And then I'm saying remove the object, and this is record, not car. So remove the object record from the table, save changes, and then I could just recall populate grid here instead of doing that refresh, right? So after delete, I just recall populate grid, which should rerun that query. I did allude to us doing it in part 2, but I'm just going to push ahead and finish this up in this video. So we need to make some modifications to our window that we were using to add our rental record. So we call it add rental record. I'm going to rename it to add edit rental record, and by renaming it and saving it, it's going to ask me if I want to rename all references. So I'll click yes, so that everywhere that it was making reference to add rental record, it will now say add edit rental record. Of course, I need to modify the code, so I'm just going to right click, say view code, and that brings me directly to the view file. But I'm also going to bring up our add edit vehicle code files so that we can see them side by side. Once again, I'm going to make some very similar modifications. So I'm going to take most of the properties that I had in add edit vehicle and place inside of add edit rental record, starting with the is edit mode, because then we need to track if it's edit mode or add mode. You see that we had 2 constructors here. So I'm going to take all of these properties or all of these lines of code that were inside of the, let me just remove what's not necessary. So I had car rental entities as the name here. So to keep everything consistent, as I've been saying before, I'm just going to rename it to _DB. All right. So it's better to just keep everything consistent, use one variable name across the board so that everybody knows who they are. Right. So I have LBL title. I didn't give the label inside of this window a title, but I'll just say add new rental, and the text of the window should also say add new rental, and is edit mode is false. All right. And then I will declare another constructor. So I can just write CTOR, press tab twice, and then it generates another constructor. And then I will put in the object of rental record. So I can just say car rental record, and I'll just say record. All right. So remember that when we're doing the add edit vehicle, what we did was create a second constructor that allowed us to pass in the record that needed to be edited. In this case, it was a car to edit. So to keep it consistent, I can say record to edit. All right. And then once again, I'm just going to copy most of this, well, all of this code, since it's very similar, once again, and then I'll just change out. So this is edit rental record. All right, let me put record so that my sentences are complete through and through. So rental record, edit rental record. And then this is record to edit, not card to edit. All right. And then populate fields. That is something that we need to load up. So I'm just going to generate a method for that. And then go back to add vehicle, and then we'll see all of the fields that were populated. So we're probably going to have to do that part manually since they are two entirely different forms. I'm not going to copy this code, but I'm going to still follow that pattern. All right. So then what I'm going to do is scroll down to the beat button one click. So you see, even these things, when we're starting off, I was starting off simple, so I didn't want to complicate everything. But now that we're at more advanced and we're going back to our old code, we realize that we have some gaps. So like button one underscore click. I don't like this button one underscore click. We didn't name the button at the time, but now that we're naming buttons, you can probably go back and give it a better name and change out the name of the button click event that is associated with it so that your code is more readable. Anyhow, what I'm really here for is to get back these fields. So what I'm going to do is just copy all of this so that I have all of the fields that need to be populated. And then I'm going to remove. So I just wanted the field names. That's all I really wanted. But I'm trying to work, a bit smarter than I'm trying to work harder. So I'm just getting the relevant parts because I have it all over. So instead of sitting down and retyping and trying to remember all of these fields, I know I had them somewhere else. So I just went and got them, right? And you see here, I have a few errors because this is calling on the car rental entities, which we changed to DB. So let me just fix that same time. So, I mean, if you may not have some of the problems I'm having, but I'm going through them just so that when you see similar problems, you know exactly what you need to do to fix them, right? So here I see that I have my fields and I need to give them values. So TB customer name dot text is going to have the value of, well, this is car to edit. I don't want it to say car to edit. So it says car to edit because I generated the property based on the function call, the function based on the function call, sorry. So it's record to edit. So I'll change that to record to edit. And I'll also change this to record to edit and change the type. So you notice it's a generic object type. So to make sure that it says car rental record. So strongly typed language makes sure that all of your types are proper. So it's record to edit dot, and then I'll say customer name. All right. And then just the same for the date rented, DT rented dot value is going to be record to edit dot date rented. And then the same here. Oh, but then I'm getting an error where it's saying that it cannot implicitly convert nullable. So once you see that question mark alongside a data type, it means it's nullable, which means that I may or may not have a date time or a value inside of it. So it's saying that to the right, this is nullable, but to the left, it's not nullable. The value is not nullable. So they're saying they can't just say that, okay, I have a nullable data type. So I'm just going to say date time to convert it. All right. So now we see that the date time is not nullable. All right. So I converted it from a nullable date time to an actual date time. So once again, if you just hover over date rented, you'll see the question mark. So the reason the question mark is there and it's nullable is that this is coming from the database. And remember that our database design, or at least my database design, says that the date time allows nulls. So if I allowed nulls from the database design when LINQ was converting it into C# equivalent data types, then it would have retained that allow null property, so that the data type would have had this question mark to say that the date time is allowed to be null in C#, just like how it is allowed to be null in the database. In reality, however, that nullable date time data type is actually different from a regular date time. Just the same with string and int and almost every other data type. You have a nullable version and you have a version that requires a value. All right. So I'll just do the same thing for the next line, where I'll just go ahead and write the date time at the front, and then I will call the object dot date returned. And then for the cost, I'll say object dot cost. All right. I don't believe I need any of this, but then I see here where they're saying that I have, what is the problem? So this is a decimal. So of course I need to do this to string. So the database, coming from the database, it's a decimal. I need to convert it to a string so that it can go inside of the text box. All right, so I still have a few errors to fix. Going back to the top, we see where there's no object on my form called LBL title. So I'm just going to make sure I go over to my design. So Solution Explorer, add edit rental record, and this would be the said title, right? So or said label rather. So I'm just going to go to the properties and give it a name. So right now by default it's label 1. I'll just rename it to LBL title. And once I do that, that should solve that error. And there it goes. And let's see if there are any other errors. So you can always see if there are errors in your code by just looking over here. You see that little red, any line that has an error, it will show you a red square on that line as a visual cue. And the next error here is that it's still looking for the old entities reference. So I'll just change that out to my new object name, which is underscore DB. All right. So the next thing I would probably want to do is to enforce that edit mode. So I have edit mode declared. I have it being set to true or false based on which constructor is being called. Oh, so all right, I'll do that later. And then what I'll do is modify the click event to get all the data and then do the validations. And then after checking if it is valid, we check if we're in edit mode or not. So let me just do that quickly. So if is edit mode and else. All right. So I'll put the else. So I'll put all of this in the else, because this is what happens if it's not in edit mode. It adds, right? So if it's not in edit mode, then we're adding. I already have the add code, so I put it in the else. But then if it is edit mode, then I'll need to get the record by ID and then re-add it. So then, and I'm sorry if I've seen back and forth, but we're just going through this together from scratch anyway. So to get the ID, remember that what we did in the add edit vehicle was that we created a property, or we created a control which was hidden, a label which was hidden, to which we had assigned the ID of the record that came over in the constructor call. So we failed to do that this time. Let's just do that to make sure that we have all the bases covered. Once again, it's good that we already wrote this code, because when we do a side-by-side comparison, it can help to inform what we need to do, right? So I'll go back to my design for the add edit rental record. I will bring over from the toolbox a label. All right, so come on controls, I'll get a label, place it somewhere. It doesn't really matter at this point. I can just change the properties to say that, okay, I want this one to be record or LBL record ID. Sorry, that's text. I want text to be blank. So I don't want it to have any text, but I do want it to have the name, LBL record ID, and then I want its visibility to be false. So it will be hidden. All right. So we have that hidden label somewhere. It doesn't really matter where, if you can see it or not. It doesn't really matter unless you need to delete it. Then I guess you can paint over that area to help select it. But moving along, what we want to do is to make sure that we are also populating that LBL record ID dot text with the ID coming from record to edit. All right, so record to edit dot ID. All right. And of course, I have to say to string. Sorry. Good. So we have our ID somewhere on the form, right? So when I move along and I'm about to do editing now, the first thing I do is retrieve that. So var ID is equal to, and then I can just implicitly convert this. Well, no, I can't. I can do an int.parse rather, int.parse. And then I'm parsing the record ID dot text. All right, so whatever gets stored in that in the text value for that label, I'm parsing it to an int and I'm retrieving that ID. And then I can say var record is equal to, get it from the database, db dot, and I want car rental records dot first or default that, and then queuing up my lambda expression, q dot id property is equivalent to whatever ID value I just got and stored inside of my variable called ID. All right. Now that I have the record, I need to go about changing out the actual values. So I can actually just, well, so what I already did was I scraped the values from the form. That's what we were doing from day one, right? When we submit the form, we have local variables that get all of these values from the form. All right. So what I'm going to do is, now that I have the record, I'm just going to borrow this code down here. Actually, I can, well, I'll just borrow all of this code here, paste it up here. And then what I will say is, instead of saying rental record, because rental record was relative to the object that we created from the start, when we said rental record is blank, and then start assigning all the values accordingly, this time I retrieved a record that existed and my variable is record. Or, well, I could actually just call the variable rental record just the same, because within the scope, this rental record exists within the if scope, and then this rental record object exists inside of the else scope. All right. So then based on whatever, and I mean, this code could probably be refactored. I'm seeing how it can be refactored right now to be, more, much cleaner, but I'm not going to complicate it. I'm just going to leave it like that. So I'm declaring an object. Well, I'm retrieving a record here, and then using this record, I'm going to reset all of the values based on what we just stored in our local variables coming from the form. All right. And then in this situation, in the else situation, I'm creating a brand new record, and then I'm still populating this brand new record with values coming from the form. So you see, even populating with values coming from the form, all of that is repeated code. This code could have been done one time, really. All right. So anytime you see repeated code like this, you can look for an opportunity to refactor it. So I'm going to leave you to do that. I'll refactor it later and explain it to you, but then you can try it on your own and see how best you can rearrange the code that you don't repeat all of these lines of code, but you could do it one time and get away. All right. So moving on, the next thing that we want to do, having repopulated all of the records with the potentially new values, even if they're the old values, but the potentially new values from the database, is to save the changes. So I can just once again copy that, save changes, and then once we're done, we want to close. So I'm actually just going to write close After the message box comes up, if you're adding, we just close, or rather I can just do one close. I don't have to close if you edit and close if you delete, but if is valid and you do all of these things, then you just close at the end of that, right? So I'm going to set a message box after saving changes, after an edit operation, and I'll just duplicate this. So that's another duplication here again, right? So the problem with duplication is that if I have to make a change to something, then I have to do it here, and I have to remember to do it here. And then in this case with the message box, I have to do it here, and then I have to remember to do it here. So one way to refactor your code would be to just show, like call a method that does something one time, all right? So you have multiple ways to do it. Well, as I said, you can find a way. I'll do it on my own and then explain it later on. But I want to challenge you guys to start thinking about refactoring code and reducing repetition. All right, so before I moved on, I refactored the code. So I hope you paused the video and tried it yourself, but either way I did it and I'll explain to you what I did. So I said, after checking if it is valid, then I declared an object of car rental record. All right. This is what we would have done if it was create, but we need an object of that type either way, whether it is create mode or not. So within the context, then it's okay to just do this step. Next, I check if it is edit mode. Then I want to retrieve the ID, and I want to then retrieve the record from the database and then set that as the value of rental record. So if it is not edit mode, then this is still just a blank object of car rental record. It has no value yet, except the fact that it is an initialized object. If it is edit mode, then we give it the value based on the record that we're retrieving from the database. Either way, whether it is edit mode or not, we want to be populating all of the properties with stuff from the form. So if it is edit mode, then we know the form is going to have values. And if the person is just creating a record, the form is still going to have values. So we're just getting all of those values and placing inside of the object, whether or not it was retrieved or it is still empty. After doing all of that, I'm just saying if it is not edit mode, which means that I'm about to add a record, then I want to do the step to add the record to the database, right? To the database table. And then if it does skip over that, then, well, either way, it's going to save the changes. After saving the changes, I call the message box, show the same message box, and then I close the window. And that's it. That's how I refactored that whole section to have, one instance of everything. Instead of having two instances of the same operations, you can look for things that have to happen regardless of the situation and how you can rearrange your code into fewer lines just to make it easier. So you can actually go ahead and pause at the different parts just to see. I'll add comments. All right, so I've added some comments. Let me fix a spelling error here. And so you can actually just go ahead and pause the video, look at the comments, look at the code that's written, rewrite your code that way, or, whatever it is you need to do to get acquainted with what was done here. All right. So notice that the if statement here, I don't know if I pointed it out. If you have one line of an operation, you don't need your curly braces. So here you have to have curly braces because I have two lines. But then here I just said, if it's not edit mode, and then I just indented, went to the next line and indented, it will only operate on that one line. So nothing else will be seen as part of that if statement. Now that I'm finished wiring up the add edit rental record, I need to go back to my manage rental records and that edit click event. And then I will be able to launch the window like I need to, right? So I would say add edit rental record. That's the name of my object. And that is equal to a new instance of add edit rental record. And then the object we're passing in is record, not car. And then it's the same lines of code, just changing out the object references there. And then we should be able to properly test the functionality of what we've just done. All right, so I clicked on View Archive, and then let's see what happens. So if I click Add New Record, so we see Add New Rental Record comes up. We get our blank form. Let me just make sure that it works properly. So he's renting our Volkswagen Beetle for that many days. Submit. All right, and then OK, and the window closes. It doesn't refresh, but then let's try edit. So edit is going to give us that error. If I highlight a record and click edit, then I see that I'm getting my edit screen up just as expected. So now we know that our add and edit for the rental record works just like how it worked for managed vehicle listing. And once again, we copied and pasted a lot of code, made some minor changes, but the functionality was so similar that we really didn't have to sit and retype everything, right? So we can reuse code, and then by refactoring code, we're reducing the number of steps in between. For now, I think we've done quite a bit of work on this form. So what we will do is end here. You can go through and you can revise everything that was done. If you have any problems, any difficulties with anything, feel free to let me know, and I'll be more than happy to help.